One of the many things that helps separate Spider-Man from a lot of these other superheroes is his constant want for redemption for his villains, specifically those that can be redeemed. Think your Sandmans, your Mysterios, those kinds of guys. He very much views his villains as redeemable, as real people, and while Batman does definitely believe in redemption, Spider-Man more likely reminds me of Wally West in the idea that redemption to him means sitting down and talking with your villains, and he'd much rather sit with you and talk out a problem than have to fight you about it. Unless you're the Kingpin or Green Goblin. He just wants to kick your ass. But for the most part, Peter Parker himself very much believes in redemption and to continue to make better lives for his villains. And I think that's something Spectacular Spider-Man handled very well. That idea of redemption and of redeeming villains or just characters in general throughout this show. One of the things I think it did really well was Sandman's redemption. Flint is in the show from the very first episode. Actually, he's one of my favorite reoccurring villains throughout the show. We originally meet him and O'Hearn, later Rhino, as two characters that are oftentimes trying to pull off heists for the big man of crime, L. Thompson Lincoln or Tombstone. And while they're always trying to pull off these large grand schemes and do all these stuff, unfortunately they chose the one summer where Spider-Man is having his very first appearance. And so Spider-Man pretty much terrorized them all summer, constantly putting them behind bars or in jail, and completely ruining any chances of them getting any sort of big score. And that's a common theme for Flint. All he ever wanted was a big score. He only says it like 20 times throughout the first season of the show. And he thought he could finally get it when the big man offers to give him powers to go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man. Now, the difference between O'Hearn and Flint is that O'Hearn specifically wanted to get his powers and turn into the Rhino to beat Spider-Man, to fight Spider-Man, something that Mr. Lincoln was very much looking forward to as he needed distractions for Spider-Man. But Flint, on the other hand, he couldn't care less about being a supervillain. He couldn't care less about fighting Spider-Man and beating Spider-Man. All he actually cared about was getting money, and Spider-Man simply stood in the way of him getting this money. Now, unlike in, let's say, Spider-Man 3 the movie, Flint doesn't have a kid. He doesn't have any, exterior motivation for wanting to get this money, other than the fact that, he's about his bag and he's about his check. And I can kind of respect that. That's all he really cares about. He doesn't care about Spider-Man, he doesn't care about nothing. So when he becomes Sandman, he actively avoids fighting Spidey because he'd just rather get the money, which leads to one of my favorite running gags throughout the show.
Aw, man, my money!
But of course, because he's been beaten by Spider-Man on 4 separate occasions now, even with powers, he has developed a little bit of a vendetta. He tries joining both iterations of the Sinister Six, which ultimately failed, and he's honestly fed up with it. He kind of reminds himself why he even wanted to get these powers in the first place, and that's to get his big score. And let me tell you something, I swear season 2 has such a higher budget because Sandman's effects look absolutely fantastic throughout this episode, and I love it. As well, we get, again, one of my favorite running gags throughout the show when Sandman once again fails to steal any sort of jewelry.
Oh, my big score!
But honestly, if any villain was going to pop up at this exact juncture, Sandman is probably the best one because Spidey has to worry about him the least. He's dealing with seeing Eddie everywhere he goes, making him paranoid. He has to deal with the fact that Liz's brother has just gotten out of juvie and is now back in the school system. He finally gets to see Harry come back into the picture, but unfortunately, because Harry has come back into the picture, it has completely derailed any chance of him getting with Gwen because Harry immediately goes after her, obviously feeling very, very happy with the fact that she was one of the few people to recognize his addiction. But Peter has a girlfriend, so he shouldn't even be worried about that, but that's a discussion for another day. We're focused on Sandman. Now, Marco wants nothing to do with any sort of fighting Spider-Man, any sort of that stuff. He wants to do one thing, and that's get his big score settled. Flint really isn't a bad dude. He just wants to make money, and he thinks his best way of making said money is to rob and steal, considering he probably doesn't have an education, and he probably never graduated from high school, because he's not exactly the brightest bulb in the shed. And Spider-Man very clearly points this out to him, and they almost have a really good connection moment. Almost.
With your powers, you could do some real good, help people, but you waste it on all the same stupid crimes Flint Marko committed.
Because of that old Parker luck. No matter how hard he tries to do something good, he just can't seem to succeed. And it's really, really funny. It's played for comedy, but it becomes far more important later in the episode. What I find interesting is that in one singular episode, they do more to humanize Flint than a lot of other TV shows even bother to do to humanize or recognize their villains outside of the funny little roles they play in an episode. Flint quite literally goes out of his way to help a little girl who's being bullied build a sandcastle. And if there's any way you want to gather sympathy for a character, it's to have them help a child, because this shit got me in my feels immediately. Flint isn't a bad dude. He's just not necessarily a good one. But he will be finally able to get his biggest score ever. Again, I think Sandman just looks awesome in this episode. What they do with his different character models was fantastic. I swear this season had more budget than the first one. But more importantly, Flint needs to steal literal oil. America. He needs to steal oil from an oil tanker, and because it's in the beach, we get a real great scene and showing of his powers. He's gigantic, he's fighting Spider-Man, and also trying to steal this oil. But because Flint is a perennial mess up, yeah, let's go with mess up, he can't even seem to do this right because Spider-Man just rage baits him into destroying the oil tanker. Absolutely rage baits him into doing that, which is kind of funny. But in the process of all of this wanton destruction and fighting Spider-Man, the oil tanker could become severely damaged. And if there's one thing you should know from BP, it's that when oil lights on fire, even in water, it causes ecological disasters. And it's pretty bad. But Flint never actually wanted to hurt anybody. As a matter of fact, he goes out of his way to save these people, because to Flint, it was never about doing harm to others, it was simply about getting his money. And so he often chose victimless crimes. Well, quote unquote victimless crimes. That's a whole debate for another day. Usually like robbing banks, which is insured money, stealing from jewelry stores. He was always more focused on doing anything that wasn't harming other people except for Spider-Man, because Spider-Man kept getting in his way. And ultimately Flint sacrificed his life, or was willing to sacrifice his life, in order to save the city from a giant oil tanker explosion.
You wanted a big score, Marko? As far as I'm concerned, you just scored about as big as a man can.
And while Marko might not have actually died, he did end up doing some real good. Unfortunately, we'll never get to follow up on Flint Marko's character arc because this show ends after this season, spoiler alert. After these 13 episodes, the show's done, and Flint doesn't have an appearance throughout the rest of this season, as they have a lot more to focus on, and his arc is kind of done for the season. He's made a lot of appearances anyways. And it's kind of unfortunate, not even kind of, it really is unfortunate, because I feel like this is one of the better adaptations of a redeemed Sandman, and it would have been very interesting to see where they would have gone with Flint if he would have been like this on again, off again hero type, like how they did Black Cat, or if he would have been far more of a reoccurring villain that just has a heart. Think something like the Trickster from the Justice League show. I found it very, very enjoyable, and I'm a big sucker for redemption stories, but unfortunately not everyone is necessarily capable of redemption. And that's not because it's out of reach of them, but rather because the person doesn't want redemption. It's not what they care about getting. For example, Eddie Brock has been haunting Peter a lot throughout this season, often making his life terrible in hopes that Peter will eventually lead him to wherever he left the symbiote. Eddie Brock has honestly had a chance to start his life anew. Peter didn't go after him to put him in prison. Peter didn't try and get him involved with the law or expose him. He was letting Eddie go and try to redeem himself and move on, hopefully. even if it did make Peter unsettled that Eddie was around. But Eddie doesn't really care about that. Instead, he mostly cares about getting the suit back. And while all of that is happening, there's also another episode I want to discuss. It helps build up Eddie Brock's non-redemption, I guess you could say, which offers a good parallel to the rest of the cast that I'm talking about redemption-wise in this episode. But as well, it provides me a little bit to talk about something I couldn't fit in the structure of any of my other videos, and that's the episode about Captain John Jameson, JJ's son, who comes back from space and has picked up a bunch of microbes from the symbiote that essentially supercharge him and give him superpowers. Way better than being a werewolf like he is in the comics.
I hear it's all the rage on Jupiter.
You look like a fool superhero.
He's still super fun, super lighthearted. He has these great jokes just like he did in the first season, except now he's got superpowers, which is really cool. But unfortunately, the molecules are unstable and slowly warping his body. For all intents and purposes, there's my catchphrase, JJ's son is a really good dude. He is an astronaut. He cares about other people. He very much is like a morally good person. But unfortunately, this is a story about power and about not only how it corrupts, but also a little bit to do with mental health, I feel like. Because these microbes don't just affect him physically, but they affect him mentally as well. These things aren't good for him. Not to mention the fact that Peter's mental health has been absolutely in the toilet since the entire Eddie incident. Throughout the second season, he's had nothing but nightmares, terrible dreams, showing clear signs of potential post-traumatic stress disorder, especially revolving around Eddie. Now granted, Eddie was definitely playing into Peter's fear and recognition, but he's also just been making Peter's life like a legitimate living hell and just miserable in general since he got the suit back. And that's kind of like his whole shtick for right now. And it also doesn't help that like Captain Jameson wants to be a superhero and is trying his hardest to be a hero, but unfortunately, he's not that experienced.
Wait, I am help. Come on, Jameson, you're not seriously thinking about leaping tall buildings in a single bound.
And while it's very admirable that Captain Jameson wants to use his powers to do good and wants to be a good person, unfortunately, he completely underestimated the potential dangers of those spores that live inside of his body now, and what they'll do if he doesn't keep them in check, something Dr. Connors warned him about early in the episode. The more he uses his abilities, the more he'll grow, the denser he'll get, and potentially the worst he will get mentally. And unfortunately for Captain Jameson, that starts to manifest fairly early into him using his abilities. One of the things that I found to be really cool about this episode is that you can slowly hear his heartbeat start to speed up throughout the episode as he starts to become more erratic and less rational, specifically when it comes to dealing with Spider-Man, as he wants Peter to stay and prove to the police that he's not the one who started this fire, nor has he been the one going around the city doing heinous crimes. And obviously, because Peter is a superhero, he doesn't want to do this, and it's probably not in his best interest to. Jameson doesn't see it that way and starts to throw around his weight. And while I can definitely see Jameson's side in this, it's not like Peter's trying to trounce on him or anything. But unfortunately, Jameson doesn't see it that way. You can start to hear his heartbeat get more and more erratic, and he starts to become less and less rational. It's like one tiny slight ends up leading to a massive blowout for him. Oh, and as I mentioned previously, Peter's life has not been easy because Venom has been going around town pretending to be Spider-Man, wearing a similar yet slightly different suit to what Peter wore when he was in the black suit, and making his life miserable by attacking police officers, our favorite recurring police officers, DeWolf and the man whose name I can't remember. He also doesn't help things with Colonel John Jameson, who is already vehemently obsessed with Spidey, and ultimately gets a handful of ass whooping by Venom, something that just sends him completely over the edge. In Eddie's bid for non-redemption and his zero care for anything other than himself, he ends up pushing J. Jonah Jameson too far, and that's really unfortunate. Even if Triple J is super excited that his son's a good guy and insistent that Peter's a bad guy.
This isn't the first time the Bugle got it wrong when the copycat dressed up as the web slinger. Now you really want to embarrass yourself and your paper? Again?
Shout out Captain Stacy being the GOAT once again. But more importantly, Triple J's son ultimately wants Spider-Man dead. Like, he doesn't even care anymore. He goes full bloodlust and is attempting to derail Spider-Man. What we're seeing here is the power within him ultimately corrupted him and changed him, but not like on a moral level. He doesn't like do this because he believes it's morally right. I'm in firm belief that those spores had a genuine effect on his mind and his mental health and are ultimately a leading factor into what caused John to become very unstable and ultimately attack Peter and ignore any sort of property damage. It's a very far cry from the John that we saw during the Halloween episode, a very far cry from the John that we saw earlier in this episode. And I think that's what they were trying to portray, that these powers ultimately were ruining his life, much like how his werewolf side was ruining his life in the comic books. I think this was a really cool way of adapting that story instead of just giving us, you know, werewolf, because I was never a huge fan of that. I like this story better. But unfortunately, after his powers are completely disabled as the spores needed electricity to die, and Peter was able to do that, it leaves John irreparably damaged mentally. He's so far gone that he ends up needing to go to Ravencroft.
I missed the power. I need it. I have to get the power back. Give me back the power. Give it.
And while they never really address Peter's mental health in this show, I think now is probably a good time just to mention to, you know, check up on yourself, check up on your loved ones. Mental health is a serious conundrum and something you should be looking into as often as possible. You are enough and you do enough in your everyday life. It is okay for you to take a break. I know a lot of the times I struggle with taking breaks because I just feel lazy and miserable if I'm not working 24/7. But it's okay to take a break. It's okay to do something for yourself that you enjoy. And it is very, very much okay to reach out to those in your life. Anyone in your life. Okay, soapbox time over. Take care of yourselves because I want to see y'all doing well and prospering. Back to our regularly scheduled program. Just to make everything worse for Peter, Venom shows up and straight up just says, "Hey, this dude's Spider-Man." And I thought it was one of the funniest ways to do the reveal subplot. They did this in the 90s show, except Venom never got around to like really revealing Spider-Man's identity. But I love the fact that this show was willing to go so far as to quite literally just have an entire episode dedicated to Peter's identity potentially being exposed, as well as giving us one of the best wrap-up episodes this show has ever given us, with closure to the entire arc of Eddie and Venom. Oh, and one like very true Jameson L. Like, we've seen Jameson really put his neck on the line for Peter repeatedly through the show, even if he is a hard ass. But this is like the largest L he's taken all season long, was posting that headline. Another part of this episode I absolutely loved were the interviews with the characters, and I'm pretty sure the Connors know that Peter is Spider-Man now, but the interviews with the characters are really funny. Aunt May's was hilarious. She thought she was being punked. But like, that's a lot of fun. But Eddie, and the reason obviously I've been talking about non-redemption throughout this episode, is that Eddie comes back to ESU and he could have left the symbiote behind. He could have moved on with his life, maybe even come back, potentially made amends with Peter, and even if not, he could have gotten his job back because ESU has funding now. A lot of the issues that he was facing have been solved throughout season 2, except for maybe his relationship with Peter. But instead of doing any of that and caring even in the slightest about that, he would much rather spend time getting revenge on Peter, because that's what matters to him most. Also, that, Jesus, his face does not look good in that. And in doing so, he ultimately ends up ruining part of Peter's life because paparazzi swarms him at every available chance. I actually hate this moment so very much. I genuinely do not like how they handled the romance between Peter, Liz, Gwen, and Harry, but that is for its own video. Moving on to something far more poignant, Eddie is pretty much on his reverse Flash timing. He is quite literally making Spider-Man's life miserable at every available turn, trying to reveal his identity, trying to fight him anywhere, anytime, whenever, wherever. He really feels like Aaron the Plumber, I'm gonna be honest. He's also taking advantage of his bosses. He gets his job back at ESU and immediately steals Gene Cleanser from them without even a second thought. Because to him, it's about destroying Peter's life and ruining his life. He doesn't think about the consequences that could be befallen for his former friends and employers that he was very close with. They didn't want to fire him, they lacked funding, and that's not their fault. Unfortunately, Eddie got the raw end of a deal, and what he does to them isn't right. And also throughout this whole sequence, we get a really funny interaction of Flash pretending to be Spider-Man, just to prove that like Peter can't possibly be the webhead. And it's in this that we get to the climax of the episode, and one of my favorite fights throughout the show, probably like top 3 I would say. The Gangland episode is by far the best fight scene in this entire show. But this one was great. Spidey is fighting off this back foot without his mask against Venom, who is absolutely ready to torch him. They get to go through the entire school. So many environments, so many sets. Like, I just wonder how many hours it took to animate all of this, because it looks so good. As well as, it's like an intelligent fight. The two characters aren't just like beating up on each other. They're pretty evenly matched skill-wise.
That was unpleasant.
Oh great, now he's mad.
With Venom having the obvious upper hand because the symbiote is absolutely busted. But ultimately it's Flash that comes and saves the day, because he's the one who prevents Peter from having to drink a nice little bit of Gene Cleanser, something he very much gave up and threw away at the end of the last season. And it's in this interaction that Eddie has to drink the Gene Cleanser. It's also through this interaction that we understand why Eddie has been so hell-bent on ruining Peter's life and making him miserable. It's not even Eddie who wants Peter dead so badly, it's the symbiote. And Eddie refuses to let go of his hate, refuses to let go of his pain, because that's what the symbiote feeds off of. It only loves him for that.
Eddie, it's over. You're free, you can stop this. Stop hating.
Can't. It only loves me for the hate.
One of you guys had left on my previous Spider-Man video, Spectacular Spider-Man video, that the symbiote represented for them more of an abusive relationship or like a more terrible, bad situationship relationship type deal, right? Instead of addiction. And personally, I don't think that fits for Peter. I think for Peter, it was very much an addiction, but for Eddie, it is that terrible, toxic relationship. The symbiote is only with Eddie because it was scorned by Peter. It only stays with Eddie because Eddie also shared a level of hate for Peter Parker, whether that was because Peter stole his job, his health, his apartment. But in this show, it has more to do with the falling out of relationship-wise, the fact that the two characters don't get along anymore, Peter's constant lying, which is valid for Eddie to be upset at and to not want to be friends with him anymore. The constant lying, the taking of pictures, that's all very valid. But what isn't is to harbor and to hold on to that hate for no reason other than to make Peter's life miserable, hopefully. And that's the reason that's the only reason the symbiote's with him. It's because he harbors that hate. And it's all the symbiote wants and all it feeds off of throughout his relationship is the hate. And for me, that just echoes being in a very, very toxic relationship. One that's only built off of hating somebody else and not built off of the love you have for each other or the bond you have with each other. It's all about the hate. It's all about essentially being evil. So for me, in my own analysis, I very much feel like the symbiote works as an allegory for a bad and toxic relationship with Eddie Brock far better than it would with Peter Parker, where I think it has to do more with addiction. But I do think the commenter was right in pointing that out, because that's something I definitely noticed with Eddie. I just think they applied it to the wrong character. And as far as this goes, being that this is the last time we'll see Venom in the show at all, I thought it was really, really well done. I thought the episode was fantastic. I thought the plot was awesome. I loved how he appeared in just about every episode leading up to his actual appearance. I loved the idea of Peter struggling with seeing Eddie everywhere he went. I love Eddie playing Peter. I love that final line about it being a toxic relationship, about how it's only there for the hate, was fantastic. And it really echoes the sentiment that Eddie couldn't be redeemed because he didn't want to be. He didn't care about being redeemed. He cared about the hatred because the hatred would keep him in that toxic relationship that he loved so much. One that ultimately cost the Connors their jobs. You see, ESU security just hasn't been good under their leadership, and so they both have been reduced to essentially just getting to hang around the lab. They don't run it anymore. And ultimately that leads to the Connors wanting to leave. Between Eddie being revealed to be the symbiote and being an overall horrible person, between the fact that the lizard incident existed, Max Dillon, all of those little things have finally added up, and the straw that broke the camel's back was Eddie stealing from them and ultimately them losing full administrative privileges of the lab. And because of Eddie's actions, the characters choose to relocate, and that's the last we'll see of the Connors in any meaningful sense of this show. And probably the last we would have seen of them even if the show got another season. They're going away. I don't think we would have heard from them again. And it was a pretty decent send-off. At least the Dr. Connors doesn't have to become the lizard again. But through all of that chaos, there's at least been one constant. And that's the fact that Flash Thompson has oddly had Peter's back a lot throughout this second season.
And thank you, Flash. Wow, it's 2 I owe you.
I can't go a redemption episode without talking about potentially my favorite redemption in this show, and that's of Flash Thompson. When we get to Flash in this second season, he's pretty much been struck out on life. His whole jock and aesthetic has been completely ruined by the fact that he lost Liz Allen to Peter. Peter has 2 girls wrapped around his fingers, and he can't even get one right now. One that is meaningful anyways. As well, he's completely destroyed his knee winning the championship game in the playoffs, so he's on crutches and honestly feeling like a loser. So he ultimately decides to go after somebody he would normally not go after. He finds her very cute, and that's Shashawn Wen. Somebody that Flash would never even think of going after prior to his injury, prior to losing Liz, and being the head of the football team, the big guy on campus. He invites her to his birthday, which is one of my favorite subplots throughout the episodes of season 2 is Flash's birthday. A lot of this is simply subplots. It's revealed in this episode that him and Peter were really, really close friends in nursery school, and that immediately helps to destroy his cred in front of a majority of the football team and all of the girls that he would typically go after. It's also revealed he got his nickname because he was more of a streaker and not because he was that fast. And his mother records all of this. Oh, and it obviously can't be one of these videos if I don't mention my boy Rand, who is absolutely not loving his girlfriend. This man was caught playing in the snow and is not enjoying it. And another one of my favorite recurring gags, is the fact that Hobie keeps trying to speak during season 2 and nobody lets him speak. And it's honestly hilarious. But I think this is a really great way to start a redemption, is by breaking Flash down, deconstructing him, and making him miserable, essentially, throughout the majority of season 2. He has lost his knee, potentially lost his ability to play pro sports the way he wants to go to play in college, play pro, all of this stuff. He's lost it all. He's lost his girlfriend. He can't even bully Peter correctly because Peter just one-ups him at everything, especially after the whole stealing your girlfriend thing. I mean, dude's pretty much down in the dumps. and he can't even get Shashan to show up to his birthday party. Something that he is very, very frustrated with, especially directly at her. And he confronts her, only for Shashan to give dude a really, really harsh reality check. Outside of sports and outside of his usual set of groupies, Flash is a nobody. Like, in the general grand scheme of things, Flash is a nobody.
I know who you are, Flash. We're in bio together. Look, I've never seen you throw a pass, but I've seen you set off the sprinklers in the lab. Twice.
Fine. Walk away. You think you're all that? I can date any girl I want in this crummy school!
Flash is a dumb jock, and he's pretty much only being shown to attract women that are shallow. Look, that's how the show presents it. I don't know these girls, and Liz Allen is very, very far from shallow in season 2. Even if she was presented that way in season 1, she has a lot more depth, but that's just how the show's presenting it, so don't crucify me. Meanwhile, Shashan is shown to be very smart, very intelligent. She is school focused. She loves theater and drama. In her circles, Flash is irrelevant because she doesn't even go to the games. So Flash has to ultimately seek out the help of Peter Parker and start to rekindle their friendship so that he can actually try to have a chance with this girl. I'm now just realizing how absolutely ridiculous Flash's hair is in this show. Like, I've never sat down and looked at it long enough to realize, how the hell does he style that in the morning? And who told him that was a good look? Either way, we get another repeat of the Rand joke where he doesn't get to speak, all in favor of Flash trying out for this play. And he does absolutely terribly. Word of advice, it's probably not a good thing just to join a club or to do an activity just to get with a girl. You're almost always going to come off as disingenuous and as though you're not there for the reason you want to be there, which is to enjoy yourself and to have a good time. Spoiler alert, if you just do things because you like them, you'll just have a far more enjoyable life. At least that's what I've learned. And yeah, Flash doesn't even get to make the play at all. Now, this play is Midsummer's Night Dream. Did I say that right? Okay, yeah, I did say that right. I remember reading this play my sophomore year of high school. Dude, that feels like forever ago. Anyways, it's a lot funnier now seeing all of the things happen regarding the play. Now that I've actually read the play through, it's hilarious. But ultimately, Flash is repeatedly trying to hit on Shashan, and it's not working. It's to the point that it's getting like a little creepy because she's like, dude, you're not even in the play. We're not doing private readings. Leave me alone. And so I think that was really funny. But Flash, he tries so desperately to get into this play. He's like pulling the whole, I need to get a girl. Do you mind if I get in the play? And ultimately it doesn't work. But later in the episode, when giving the interview for Peter and talking about how he could be in any sort of costume, and mentioning that Peter dressed up for Halloween, which leads to Peter's exoneration, he dresses up as Spider-Man and almost gets himself jumped by a bunch of gangsters. No comment on these two. No comment. But anyways, Flash ultimately is the one who saves Peter, much as we discussed later, from Venom. Which means that Pete owes Flash twice. And Flash, in all honesty, has been a pretty decent person throughout season 2. He's really been brought down a few pegs, and he's not actively being a terrible person, and he's not actively trying to be horrible. He's a pretty decent person, all things considered, outside of his relentless bullying of Peter. Something that has pretty much gone away in season 2. And not that I'll ever exonerate bullying, because I think it's stupid, and he kind of got what was coming to him after all of those years of essentially being a part of the popular crowd. I love how this season 2 really deteriorates the idea of a popular crowd and gets rid of it. And ultimately Flash does get a part in the play, but it's playing Nick Bottom, who turns into a donkey. Bottom, ass, donkey. Oh, Shakespeare. Oh, Shakespeare. Anyways, he pretty much doesn't have lines to practice. And that's kind of it, at least for the episodes I was planning to cover in this video. But I figured I couldn't let go of Redemption if it didn't mean fully covering Flash's thing. And so I wanted to cover one more episode, but I'm not going to cover the whole episode. I'm just going to cover the parts that pertain to Flash, because that's what actually matters. Flash and the rest of the school are supposed to go on a trip in which they are supposed to ride along with the police officers. Hobie joke again. They're supposed to ride along with the police officers. They're supposed to see how the police do things. Flash is very dismissive of the police because he's like, Spider-Man does their job for them. They don't need to exist, which is hilarious. But it's also where we get to see that, like, he gets paired up with Harry Osborn, not whom he wanted to be paired up with, but it's where we start to understand why Flash has been treating Harry not so great. We all know that Harry got addicted to Goblin Green, and that's the reason that ultimately Harry had to leave during playoffs. Flash doesn't know this, and Flash is very, very upset that Harry left. Essentially and unfairly pinning the idea that if Harry had been there, he was faster than Hobie, ironic, and would have been able to catch the ball faster, and Flash would have been able to release faster before he got his knee torn up. It's in this moment that Harry chooses to be very vulnerable with Flash, and Flash definitely catches an L for his response, but he was pissed because if Harry gets caught juicing and it's revealed, like, the state championship is nullified because all of the games they won with Harry don't matter. But while he was a dick to Harry, it's ultimately Flash who ends up telling the people, specifically the school board, that Harry was juicing, and they end up taking the trophy away. He did this because to him it doesn't mean anything if it's not done fairly.
Nice, Osborn. Bad enough you juiced. You had to spill and ruin it for—
He didn't spill. I did. Title's meaningless if it's not won fair and square.
Now look, I played high school football, and I definitely had some thoughts on this scene. And like, from the football perspective, I don't know if I would have ratted my teammate out for juicing. Like, I know one of my no comment on that. But I don't know if I would have ratted my teammates out for juicing or whatever my teammates wanted to do. I don't think I would have done it. But I do completely see where Flash is coming from with the idea that it doesn't matter if it's not won fair and square. He wasn't doing this to hurt Harry Osborn, but rather because to him, it was meaningless. It's really this nice bit of character growth for Flash, that he would even be willing to do something like this because the title doesn't mean anything to him without that. And as well, it really shows his deconstruction of being this jock football player where he derives all of his pleasure, all of his self-worth almost from being a really good football player. And that seems to get completely shattered, especially with his injury. Something you have to learn pretty quick is, like, once you hurt, man, you just kind of out, and you have to, like, live life not doing the one thing you think you're really, really good at. Now, granted, do I think it makes him super ethical that he just took a championship away from all of the rest of his teammates that did all the hard work? No. Do I think Harry should have been the one to come forward himself and say something? Yes. I don't love that Flash is the one that had to expose it, but I do love his response, and I love his idealism that it doesn't mean anything without, you know, doing it fair and square. I really like that idea, even if, cough, cough, nobody does it fair and square, but that's besides the point. Anyways, Flash ultimately wins over Shashan with this act. I think the beauty of this for me was that he wasn't doing this for Shashan. He wasn't doing this to gain her attention, but rather he gained her attention doing the one act that he did not only for the betterment of himself, but also for, like, the moral rightness of it, I guess. And while I don't love the fact that Flash's what appears to be like week to 2 weeks of pestering is rewarded with a relationship, I do like the idea that he himself does not get the relationship until he starts to mature as a person and starts to do things for himself outside of wanting Shashan. It's like I mentioned earlier in the video, don't go do some activity because a girl you like is doing it. Find an activity that you truly enjoy doing, and you'll look infinitely more attractive when A, you know what you're doing, and B, you actually give a shit. Oh, and Flash was overly successful in also proving he's not just a dumb jock, but instead, underneath all of his Flashisms, dude's got a heart. And I think that's the main key takeaway I took from this version of Flash is he's got a heart underneath all of that idiocy. It's something I really, really loved about the Amazing Spider-Man's Flash, was that dude had a heart. Something that Tobey Maguire's Flash never showed, and something that Agent Venom showed really, really well. I would have loved to have seen Agent Venom in this show, but again, cancel. Anyways, with all of that being said, I think the second season handles redemption fairly well, with some actual redemption, some non-redemption, and some of my favorite like B and C plots to episodes that the entire season has. Season 2 definitely has its fumblings, especially with how they do the whole relationship thing. But I think Shashan and Flash was one example of like a really well done relationship outside of Flash's weird pestering. Because remember, if she says no, just go talk to somebody else, please. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Anyways, thank you all so very much for watching. I truly appreciate each and every one of you guys. All right, time to do the whole YouTuber thing. If you like the video, please leave a like. It helps out the channel a lot. If you dislike the video, leave a dislike and then leave a comment down below letting me know why, as constructive criticism helps me to be a better creator for all of you. If you want to sub, it's free. You can always unsub later. I would totally recommend it. I keep making videos like this just about once a week, or at least I try to make it once a week. Some videos take longer than others. And finally, I do have a Patreon in which you can support me as a content creator, but don't feel like you have to. It's $1 a month. You get to see all these videos early. You get access to the Discord to talk to me, and obviously the wonderful people that watch these videos, who are absolutely fantastic. And as well, if you are in the $5 or above tier, you get shouted out at the end of each and every one of these videos. So without further ado, it's about time I got around to doing that. So shout out Belladonna, shout out McGann, shout out, of course, eSibber13, shout out Transgers1, VideoGamer75, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. You all are amazing. Hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.